Well, hello, Michelle. Welcome to the show. I am honored that you're here.
Thanks, Liz. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So, just to give our audience a little bit of background about you, I always like to start with an origin story. Can you take us through your origin story and what life was like in those early years, as a young mom?
Well, I certainly didn't come into motherhood with everything in place like we would like it to be. Marc-André was my second child. My first child, Bridget Ann, was born when I was 22. And at the time, I was living in Montreal with my then partner. And we were young, and we were just kind of building a life together. We thought we were on track, but we certainly hit some bumps in the road shortly before she was born. We were in a pretty serious car accident, and our business was wrapped up in that vehicle because he was a traveling sort of electrician to he handled signage. So I'm trying struggling for what did he do exactly? But in that 2 weeks before she was born, we essentially lost our business, lost our vehicle, and I was not particularly well following that accident. And so we came home from the hospital. I had to go back to the hospital for a week because I was quite sick. So we basically had a new baby and no income, and I was ill. And we were in Montreal, so I was on the other side of the country from my family. So the fallout from that was we ended up having to go to the food bank for formula. We got evicted from our apartment, had to find another place, sort of had to start from scratch in a really difficult situation. And when my daughter was 2, that's when we moved over to BC for a fresh start. And Marc-André was born shortly after we moved to BC. And we were basically in this small apartment with a few sticks of furniture. And my husband's work that he had got in BC, he lost his job the same week Marc-André was born, and that they ran out of work and just said, we don't have any more work for you. So there we were with a 2-year-old and a newborn in a new community without any base of family and friends, and unemployed. And so he found some work in Vancouver. I'm not sure you know the geography of the area. We were in Vancouver Island. And he found some work in Vancouver on short notice, which meant he had to take a ferry and go to a different city and leave me alone in the apartment with this 2-year-old and this newborn baby. And I was sick. I had a sinus infection, which I'd never had before in my life, and figured out really quickly what a sinus infection is. So, I know the title of your podcast is Motherhood and Stress, but I have to say, my introduction to parenthood was actually quite traumatic. And it was something that, I had to come back from as a parent and not have that take away from my capacity to love and raise my children.
God, what did you do in those early days? Because I feel like so many mothers tuning into this know exactly, not your exact story, but know the struggle, know the fear that all new mothers feel. Am I doing enough? Am I being enough? Am I doing a good enough job? We've all felt that, and it's deeply scary. What did you do to climb out of that, to get to where you are now? Even, when Marc-André and your daughter were older, what did you do to heal yourself?
Well, I think healing is a lifelong process, from the traumas that we experience. And I think one of the central truths to motherhood is, we live in this world where we have this expectation of what it's going to look like. We have these books, and now we have social media, which adds even more layers to it, that essentially says this is what it should look like. This is how it should unfold. These are all the things that you should be doing for your children. And so we have these expectations, and then we have children, and then we have to raise them in real time as life throws whatever it will throw at us that we could not necessarily expect or plan for. And so now you have to reconcile that with your internal expectations, the external societal expectations, and you have to find a place where it works for you and it's going to work for your children, because there's things that you can control and change and things that you can't. So for me, it was very much about keeping taking sort of this two-pronged approach. One is keeping my eye on what was to me like the big picture things in life. Like, what do we really want from parenting? What do we really want for our children in their future? And, right now, I might not be in a position to give them, the latest and best, toys or equipment that everyone says that you should have, the $500 car seat or whatever it is. We might just be making do with what we can provide at the moment. But really, when you look at it in the great big grand scheme of things, you recognize a lot of those things are really unimportant. Like, did your child get dance lessons at 3? No, not really a big deal. Like, it is something that that your children can reach adulthood and reach that place of self-actualization without necessarily having all of those things. So, it's important to kind of pull back from that and not allow that to stress you. And then to think, okay, what can I do in the moment? What can I do now? What can we do in our life to actually be able to enjoy and embrace this day? Because, at the end of the day, we don't get that day back. So you can't get lost in the things that you can't do or the things that you can't control. And it was important for me to stay within the things that I could. So we could play hide and seek in the dark. That doesn't cost anything. We can bake together. We can go for a walk. We can invest in ways that we ultimately end up not just doing the things for our children that helps them be happy and functional young people, who are able to grow up and become the people that they should be, but we also get something out of it, like that piece of where you can't overthink the things that you can't control.
Yeah. I mean, did you grow up in a household that fostered that kind of thinking? Because I feel like unless you really step back and do the internal work, most people are just on auto drive. They're just plowing through. They're trying to keep up with the Joneses. They're taking all these external cues and thinking, okay, this is my path. This is my story. This is what I need to do. Like, how are you able to see that so differently and be okay with it and not feel that pressure that we all put on ourselves?
I think partly it was because I was a child who had a lot of opportunity for self-reflection and time to think. I was an only child, which, was in many ways really disappointing to me. I always wanted siblings. But outside of that, I had a lot of freedom. So we lived I was originally from England. We moved to South Africa. We moved back to England. Then we moved to Canada. And then once we were in Canada, when I was in about grade 2, we picked up and moved to this small northern community in northern British Columbia. And this was one of those communities like the 1970s, March of Progress, where the forest industry had moved in and they built a big dam. And so it was all young families that moved up there, had been enticed up there by the local mills to come and settle in this community. And, basically it was like in many ways a feral child. Like, we had total freedom. We were outside, summer, winter, day and night. And my parents, really, they had fairly high expectations in terms of general behavior. They were British, so, you didn't disrespect them and you respected them. But aside from that, I had a lot of intellectual freedom and a lot of physical freedom. So I could read whatever I wanted. I spent plenty of time in the library and with my nose in books. I could choose how to spend my time the way I wanted to. So if I wanted to spend the whole afternoon drawing pictures or working on some other project, I could do that. Or I had the physical freedom to go outside. So that lent, for me, a lot of opportunity just to think, just to have that capacity to determine, what do I believe in life? And I think there's an element of that balance, that we need to search for between busyness and downtime, because that downtime is what allows you to really process. And without that ability to process, you're not able to formulate those philosophies that you want to live by. You're not able to take the time to observe, what works and what doesn't work, or what you want or what you don't want in your own life. And I think that's a challenge that people face today, particularly with the distractions of social media, is that, and I've read some books on this too, that we're so distracted And we spend so much time either, we're busy with work or we're like busy with our devices that we never get to that deeper level of thought. We never get to that place where we can really process our thoughts and emotions on a deeper level. And if you've ever been for a long hike or something like that, which is something I love to do, but, when you're a couple of hours in, you realize you're not even noticing time pass anymore, and your thoughts are in this sort of deeper place. And you're really able to start to pick apart, what's important to you, what isn't important to you. And that is also something that Marc-André stressed in some of his writings when he was on his, big adventures and expeditions out in the mountains and had been alone for a significant amount of time. So that's a really long and wordy way of saying that I think that's something that I was given as a child, and that opportunity to have that headspace and that downtime and that freedom. And that was something that, I brought into my parenting. It was important for my children to have that, was to have that freedom as well, that autonomy. And that was something that Marc-André really internalized in his own life.
Yeah, I mean, I found out about you and your work and Marc-André's through the Netflix film, The Alpinist. And I remember this line you said in it that, though we didn't have a lot, I always was able to provide books for him. He always had books, and he was a voracious reader. I think that that's so special and something that really stuck with me as a mother. I took your words and I was like, okay, I will always have that for my kids. So thank you for that. But when did you start to notice that Marc-André was more introspective, was a little bit less fearless than the other kids his age? When did you start to notice that this was different? This is a different boy.
Well, I think I noticed when he came into this world, frankly, like he was born with his eyes wide open and just wouldn't settle. He was the one that finally I gave him to the nurse and said, I'm just really tired. Could you take him for a little bit? And he ended up under the heat lamp because he just wrestled his way out of the coverings. And so he had this intensity right from birth. And, he certainly wasn't an easy newborn. Like he was intense and easily bored, and he didn't settle easily. And I was frankly desperate for him to crawl, because I thought once this child could crawl, then he can satisfy his desire to explore. And then I can relax a little bit. And so, I remember laying with him on the floor, and I was like, okay, this hand and then this foot and this hand and this foot, this is how you can do it. Because he just desperately wanted to explore it. He would get up on his hands and knees and he would rock for half a second. Mm-hmm. And then he would just starfish on the floor and wail because he couldn't move. And then as soon as he could move, he just headed straight for any opening. So, if there was a little crack at the gate, he was down the stairs. And when he was about 7.5 months old, I remember just kind of looking like, your baby kind of crawls around your legs and I looked down, I'm like, wait a minute, where's the baby? And then I just noticed that our patio door was open a crack. And sure enough, I looked and he had crab crawled halfway down the back patio stairs. And these are stairs that had no riser. So they were just open to the basement steps below. And I'm usually a pretty calm person. I'm like, oh, you're bleeding. That's okay. We'll deal with it, But that was one moment where I was literally kind of frozen. And I was just like, oh my gosh, the baby. And my husband had to sort of move me out of the way and go down and get him. So he had this intensity and this drive from a very, very young age. And, that was a difficult thing to navigate as a parent as well, because his elder sister, although she was extremely active and bright child, those were things that I did not have to navigate with her. So, my first couple of years of parenting, I sort of patted myself on the back, like I'm doing a great job. She's a calm and reasonable child. And then I had the second child who was just, intense, and he often seemed quite angry, actually. Like he had very little tolerance for frustration. And it really took some time to kind of navigate that and say, how do I help him come to a place where he is able to, engage with life in a manner that he will be less frustrated, and that he will be, because, frankly, like if a child is wound up and frustrated and intense and engaged and upset all the time, you can't, they're not enjoying their life. They're not calm enough to process things and to engage and to participate. So that was something we had to kind of navigate through when he was around 2. And I think that's something that actually kind of stayed with him for his life. When he was not quite 2 years old, I noticed that if he was going to throw himself on the floor in frustration, that if it was a carpeted floor, he would just fling himself down. If it was the lino, he would sort of get down carefully and then yell. And I was like, wait a minute, there's an element of control here. So he was quite a bright kid, and I said, every time that you throw yourself screaming on the floor, you're sort of going to have to go to your room until you calm down. Then when you've calmed down, we'll come out and we'll carry on. And, he learned really quickly to start to exercise that a level of self-control. And he started to say, I'm feeling frustrated about that, or I'm mad about that, instead of just throwing himself on the floor. And so that was a really good starting point to say, okay, now we can really engage, in a relationship. I can take you out into the world. I can read you books. We can play games. There's all these things that we can do, because at least, he had come to a place of being able to kind of control and channel that energy. And, of course, that's something that developed throughout his entire life. But by the time he, was at where he was in his profession in alpinism, that was a huge part of who he was that capacity, like he said in the film, to keep it together and carry on, no matter how crazy the situation is. And I think that's such an important thing that we need to give our children, is that capacity to exercise and internalize resiliency and self-control and self-soothing techniques, so that they are not overwhelmed by life, and so that they can channel their energy in a positive way to get positive outcomes for themselves.
I think what you just said is so, so important, especially now at this time in history, with, the mask mandates for years, and kids being separated from their friends and not able to even talk to their friends during lunch. Like, my heart breaks for my boys, and then all the other children out there who are going through this, who are being really stifled and not given the opportunity to really process what's going on, to be able to handle these heavier times. So that's why, that's everything. Could you give our listener one key thing that they could do to start expanding their own children's ability to process these heavier emotions in real time?
Well, that's a really loaded and layered thing. I think everyone's situation is different too. For some parents, their situation is maybe, not quite as difficult as others. So you have parents who perhaps they're also dealing with severe financial stresses. Their job dried up during COVID. And so they're trying to support and help their children, but there's very real financial stressors going on in their own life. There's parents dealing with, relationship issues. The pressures of COVID has intensified existing relationship issues. And so again, they want to support their children, but they also have this really difficult dynamic in the relationship that they're in. And then there's, of course, parents who have children who are less resilient, or they might be somewhere on the spectrum, or, there's other things that make that child definitely more impacted by what's going on. There's children who've lost more than other children. So children who are involved in like team sports and activities where they were always together with their peers, saw those activities dry up and go away. Whereas maybe, if your child was sort of a reader or someone who liked arts and crafts, or, more solitary type pursuits, it was less impactful for them. So I think first, we need to analyze, just because the messaging out there is like, this was awful for everyone, it's like, we need to ask ourselves, so was it really awful for me? Was it really awful for my children? And if it really wasn't that bad, then one, we don't want to communicate to them that, oh, wow, you've just been a terrible 2 years. Like, if it really wasn't that bad, we don't want to generate anxiety, or a sense of having been robbed of the joy of life if that really didn't happen. Now, if that is happening, then I think for sure it needs to be acknowledged. But there's also that element of there's things that we can control in life and there's things that we can't. And we spend a lot of time, complaining and focusing on things that we can't control and communicating that to our children. We can create this sort of sense of dissatisfaction and this inability to focus on the things that we can control and the things that we can do. And I think, I so fortunately did not have to go through a situation like that with my kids in my life. This being the only pandemic since the Spanish flu, thank goodness. But, I think of all the times in our life where we had a lot of other things that were going on that we couldn't control, like very, very real stressors. And my focus was to what can we do right now, right? If you can't do this, then what else can you do? You can go outside, you can take a nature walk, you can get some books and say, we're going to, I'll give you an example. We would get books from the library, for instance, on trees, different types of trees and plants. And then we would go for a walk and we would try to notice those and we'd pick a few and then we'd come back and turn that into nature art or something like that. That could take up a good chunk of a day, just doing that. So I think there's that element of focusing on the things that you can control. And I think of one particularly stressful time in our life when my ex-husband was not working and there was so many stressors, like are we going to be able to pay the rent this month, and things that could really take away from your ability to be there to support your children. And I said, you know what, $25 this way or that way isn't going to make any big difference to our current situation. So we're going to do something every week that's fun. It won't be, a great big expensive trip to Disneyland because that's outside of the cards, of course. But, we're going to be intentional about going somewhere and doing something fun once a week. And that is going to be our decompression for the week. We all need to decompress, right? And if we don't build that decompression into our days and our weeks and our months, then it's just going to continue to build and continue to build. Right. And my personal approach to something like if it was the pandemic would be, of course, for children having to wear masks in school or not see their friends would be to be super compassionate. Yeah, this is really, really hard. I hear you. It's really hard. What are the things that we can do right now? What are the things that, we can focus on? Perhaps new discoveries. We're being forced to do something different than what we're used to. Maybe that's not a bad thing. And so trying to sort of change the narrative a little bit and then build some resiliency, right? Because, if it's not the pandemic, it could be something else 5 years down the road. And there's going to be something else that's bigger and more outside of our control again. And, if we get focused on things that we can't control and we communicate that anxiety to our children, they're going to feel like they just, that they don't have the capacity to navigate their way through these situations, right? So, I think that's, again, a very long answer to what was a short question, but I think it is complex and nuanced. But we really want to bring to it, I think, our daily life as a parent or as a mother, things that we can do, and then have fun doing it. Like I said, it doesn't cost anything to play hide and seek in the dark. And that is so much fun. One of our kids' favorite memories, and this one always really surprised me, was when we did s'mores in the fireplace while watching Meet the Robinsons. And they bring that up every so often. But again, these are things that, doesn't really rely on everything outside of our immediate home and family life being in order for us to do that. This just requires being creative.
I love that. And then just hearing you break down the question and add in so many insightful points, it just shows A, what a strong person you are, and B, what a great critical thinker you are. Because I feel like for most people, it's you don't take that extra time to really think about the problem on a wider scale. It's oh, this is horrible. I hate it. This sucks. But instead, you take it to another level. And I think for me personally, for every woman listening, every man listening, that's so inspirational. And that's something we can all take with us to be okay, wait a second, I do not, my circumstances, my emotions, my internal world isn't defined by what's going on outside of me. It's really how I control, the storm within and how I want to proceed with life. And for your children, I think that's the best gift that you could ever give them. I mean, it's direct modeling of a certain way of being that is strong, that is resilient, that is, I am in control of what I can control, and I'm going to make the best of it, in this life. I think that that's beautiful.
I just saw something that came through my news feed the other day, and it was this. I don't really watch a lot of TV or America's Got Talent or that kind of thing, but I do follow little things on social media. And there was this young singer, I believe she went by the name of Whitebird, and she was fighting terminal cancer when she went on to America's Got Talent. She sang this beautiful song of her own composition called "It's Okay." It was just absolutely beautiful. But one of the things that she said that really caught me was, we can't wait until life stops being hard before we choose to be happy. And, it's a very sad story. Like, she passed away at 31, and it just, brings all these existential questions of, like, why is it sometimes the wisest and most capable people, with most beautiful people, we seem to lose them at such a young age. Like, but setting aside those existential questions, like, there was such wisdom in that from someone who was truly living, a terrible reality, right, which is facing terminal cancer at such a young age. But that decision, her comment that, we cannot wait until life is no longer hard and before we choose to be happy. I mean, it's something we have to bring to our parenting every day, because everyday parenting is hard. There's always something. And again, like I said, we're parenting in real time. We're parenting while things outside of our control are coming at us, things that the parenting books don't mention, right? Things that the parenting blogs don't necessarily talk about on social media. But again, if we wait for everything to be, for the hard things to pass before we choose to be happy, we'll probably never get there, right? So you can still find that happiness within the midst of all the difficulties. You can, be on the floor laughing with your kids over some silly game that you're playing, even if you don't know how you're going to pay the bills, even if they have to wear masks at school, even if, there's things happening in the news that kind of freak you out. You can still have, those moments of happiness. And those are the things that build resiliency in your children. They build memories in your family. And those are the things that you're left with, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, right? Those are the things that you end up treasuring.
Yeah, absolutely. What memories really stand out for you, about Marc-André? Things he said, things that maybe nobody knows about that you just always will hold with you?
Well, it's really hard with a film that focuses on, it's 90 minutes of someone's life, and is focusing sort of primarily on, his accomplishments as an alpinist. Of course, they can't show you the entire person. And he was a highly intellectual person, very, very bright kid who graduated high school early at 16. He was very funny. He had a great sense of humor. And some of the things I remember, great memories I have with Marc-André, would be the times that we just spent together talking. He had such an active mind, and he just wanted to talk about all the things, all the time. And because we walked a lot of the time, that lent us a lot of time to talk. So we would just be walking and talking, and he would be pulling questions and ideas out of the air. And he always took quite a while to kind of work his way through to his own conclusions. And that's something I learned fairly early, was like, he was not a child that you would tell him what to believe. You didn't just say, this is how it is, because he was a thinker. And so, he would ask questions, and he would ask more questions, and you would just continue to provide information. And the more you would try to, say, pressure him and say, this is what you should do, or this is what you should believe, the more he would resist that. And, I think that was something that, as a parent, I had to notice and respect, right? And I think that's, those are beautiful memories, but it's also something that I really learned from. And that's something that I took into his later years, as he was transitioning into his teen years and his young adult years, was that this is not an individual who you're just going to direct him what to do or what to think, because he is going to come to his own conclusions. He does need that space to figure things out for himself. And if, if he had, people say, well, how could you let your child go out and do those things? How could you let him go and climb mountains and go out into the forest and whatnot at a young age? And I said, well, I could have tried to stop him, but that would have just forced him in another direction. And it also would have been me not respecting who he really was and who he was becoming as a person. And just because he went out into the mountains at 14 and did these things on his own doesn't mean that was automatically our family value, that any child in our house gets to go out in the mountains at 14. Like, it was, if you show that you have the capability to do that and the maturity and the skill set, well, that's one thing, right? So, in terms of all of these memories kind of tie into this like larger story of his life. I have memories of us sitting around the kitchen table and him telling stories and us just like laughing so hard, right? Or one memory I have, this is sort of a shared family memory, is we would always have dinner together, and the kids were always like so keen to talk about whatever was going on in their day, whatever thoughts they were having. And so there would be this constant chatter around the table, and they would get impatient, waiting for the other one to finish so they could say their piece. And so I had this brilliant idea that I had seen somewhere. I'm like, we're going to have a talking stick, So if you have this talking stick, you wait, you say your piece, and then you pass it on to the next person. I'm like, this will help with the interrupting. And so I incorporated the talking stick, and it literally lasted like one dinner, because instead of interrupting each other, they just ended up wrestling each other for the talking stick. I know it. So I was like, okay, it's less violent just to interrupt instead of being on the floor trying to wrestle the talking stick out of your sibling's hand because you're so keen to talk.
And Marc-André's going to win. I mean, come on.
Well, actually, until he was about 17, his sister could easily kick his butt.
I love it.
Yeah, and she regularly reminds him of that too. She's like, I could kick your ass until you were like 17 at least. Yeah.
Oh man. I mean, have all of these memories and just like being a mother for over 30 years, like how has being Marc-André's mother changed how you live your life now, or has it?
I think being like all of my children have changed me significantly. In different ways. I would say about my older daughters, I want to grow up to be like her one day. She's just an incredible person with a massive heart for others. And my youngest has completely challenged me in so many ways, in terms of like, how I view people with disabilities, or how, I understand the arts and that sort of thing. With Marc-André, I recognized early on that just because we have the role of parent doesn't necessarily mean that, we are smarter, wiser, or more capable than our children. And, when he came to me at 7 years old with a drawing, he'd actually woken me up from a nap. He's like, I drew you a picture. And I'm like, oh, that's odd. You're not really artsy. And I'm looking at it. So what is it? And he said, it's the ionic bonding of atoms. And I was like, oh, I think that's chemistry. You'll have to explain it to me someday. And so one of the things that I learned is that, through Marc-André in particular, that it is okay for our children to, what's what I'm looking for, they kind of like exceed our abilities or our capacities. Like by the time he was 13 or 14, and he had really started to branch out and go into the mountains on these trips, I was really honest with him. I said, you're so far beyond my ability to be a part of this. It's not like, the hockey mom or the dance mom where you're driving them everywhere and you're kind of controlling it. It's like, it was completely outside of my scope to have any part of it. And so his dad and I coached him and said, like, this is where you have to make those decisions for yourself. You have to not just follow people into dangerous situations if it doesn't feel right to you. You have to follow your instincts, and you have to understand your own skill set and take responsibility for yourself if you're going to go and do these things with people that we don't even know who they are. I can't tell you if that person that you met on that climbers forum is a safe person to climb with or not. That's a judgment you have to make for yourself. One of the things I learned from Marc-André as well is that, you know, relationship is everything. And, you know, if I had tried to hold on too tight, I would have just pushed him away. And so when he went to Patagonia and he was going to be there over Christmas, I was like, that's fine. Like, if we see you in February, we see you in December, that's okay. We just be happy when we see you and want you to do what you want to do. And never sort of applied that pressure around, here's all these expectations that we have of you as a family. But really, the flip side of that was he wanted to be with us. So the last Christmas he was with us, he had actually changed all his plans so he could be home, so he could be with us. And I think, you know, I see other parents who put a lot of guilt on their kids. Oh, what do you mean you won't be here for this event or that event? What do you mean that you can't be here for Christmas? It won't be the same without you. And I think that's, you know, that's an unhealthy way to have a relationship with your child, especially as they move into adulthood. You know, you want that desire to be with you to come from a really genuine place. And that was something I really learned from Marc-André, was like, you know, we give freedom and we receive love. Like, it's, you know, that keeping the reins short and tight does not create a relationship.
No, absolutely not. Oh, I love that. Do you have any lasting words? I mean, that was beautiful right there. Do you have any lasting message that you want the listener to walk away with about Marc-André's life, about your relationship with him, about anything that you feel called to share?
I mean, I think, you know, speaking to any mother out there, I would say, like, it is a heavy, heavy role in so many ways. Like, the expectations of mothers are so, in many ways, unreasonable. You know, people tend to question everything mothers do. They don't question everything fathers do. They don't question a father who goes to work and their child is being cared for by somebody else or in daycare. They don't say, how could you go to work and leave your child? Fathers can do that. You know, if a child is facing challenges or struggles in life, whatever that might look like, it tends to be the mother who's questioned. You know, not, again, the father who's questioned. You know, mothers at the same time are also trying to be self-actualized human beings in their own right. You know, they want to have an identity beyond being someone's mother, you know, someone's wife, someone's daughter as well. That's something what the whole feminist movement has, you know, worked really hard to promote that. So I think one of the first things I would say to mothers, like, you know, cut yourself some slack, right? Is like, you know, you will never meet everybody's expectations. You could turn yourself inside out, you know, trying to do this, and you will always be facing criticism from someone for not doing something, right? So, you know, I think it's important to step back from all those expectations and to cut yourself some slack. And like, this is something that I said on one of my recent Instagram posts too. It's like, you know, I was really struggling with the people saying, you're such an amazing parent, you're such an amazing parent, because all I could think about was all the things I regret, all the things I didn't do, all the things that I would do differently. And, you know, that was a heavy thing to wear, right? And so what, you know, my message is like, if you were that parent who left the sheets in the dryer for a week and your kids slept in the sleeping bag, or you napped while they watched daytime TV, you know, or your 4-year-old made chocolate pudding for lunch because you were too sick with your newborn to do it for them, then maybe you're an amazing parent. Like, being an amazing parent doesn't mean that you do it perfectly and right all the time. It just means you're doing your best. And at the end of the day, what you want to come away with is a relationship with your children. Yeah. You know, and not having necessarily said that you've checked all these boxes according to what society or other people have determined that you should do. So whether your child sleeps in a crib or sleeps next to you, whether you breastfeed them or bottle feed them, you know, whether they eat salad or not, like those are things that, you know, we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves for. A lot of people will come in and judge us. But I think if any message I would say is like, step back from all of that. Just get to know who your children are and have an authentic relationship with them. Be your authentic self. Encourage them to become their authentic selves, and just have that relationship that you will always have those memories.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. And, what you said, freedom equals love. I think that that's so true. And, you clearly have that with your children and Marc-André. For the listener, where can they find out more about you and watch the film?
Well, if you want to watch the film, I know in the States it's on Netflix, and in Canada it's on Prime Video. There isn't a whole lot to be found out about me. There isn't much out there about me, but, I don't know what to say about that because I'm not exactly up there.
Okay. No, totally understand. Michelle, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your personal motherhood story. Truly it is an honor to have you here. So thank you.
Thanks for your time too, Liz. Nice to meet you.